"Excuse me, staff isn't allowed on stage tonight." The words weren't whispered. They were delivered with a polished smile and a microphone still warm from applause. The ballroom of the Langford Foundation Gala shimmered beneath 40-foot ceilings and crystal chandeliers flown in from Vienna. Every table dressed in white linen and gold trim. Every plate set with $300 per person precision. Naomi Whittaker stood 3 steps from the stage when Victoria Langford, the evening's hostess in a silver couture gown, lifted a slice of celebratory cake meant for the keynote and pressed it, lightly, deliberately, into Naomi's cheek. Gasps fluttered like startled birds. A few people laughed. Someone muttered, "Security?" Naomi didn't move. Frosting traced a slow line down the side of her face and onto the collar of her simple black dress, a dress chosen for clean lines and no distractions. She looked up at the 20-foot LED wall glowing behind the podium, the Novacor logo cycling in tasteful gold. She did not wipe her face. She did not raise her voice. She stood as if anchored to the marble floor itself. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in dignity and justice, hit like and subscribe. These stories spark change, and we're glad you're here. Now, back to Naomi Whittaker. She had arrived alone, no entourage, no jewelry heavy enough to announce net worth, no security detail telegraphing power. At 44, Naomi had learned that power didn't need an introduction, it needed patience. The guest list tonight read like a Forbes index. Venture capitalists from Palo Alto, media heirs from Manhattan, a retired senator who still moved markets with a sentence. The foundation was preparing to crown its Philanthropist of the Year, a title that came with headlines and handshakes and a board seat that quietly steered millions. Victoria, third-generation socialite and current chair, believed in image. Naomi believed in infrastructure. The difference was subtle until it wasn't. "I thought you were catering," Victoria added, her tone sugar-sweet and razor-thin. The microphone carried it cleanly to the back of the room. A cluster of donors near table 7 exchanged looks, some amused, some uncomfortable. A junior associate from a Chicago private equity firm whispered, "Isn't that Whittaker from Novacor?" His boss shushed him. Across the aisle, a young event coordinator named Daniel Cruz stiffened. He'd recognized Naomi the moment she checked. In, Whittaker, founder and CEO of Novacor Systems, a technology firm that had turned predictive health data into a $90 billion ecosystem. But recognition had collided with hierarchy, and hierarchy had won. Daniel swallowed the impulse to intervene. On stage, the MC cleared his throat, attempting to pivot. "Let's keep things moving," he said, a smile pinned too tight. The band resumed a soft jazz riff that didn't quite land. Naomi lifted her eyes to Victoria. Not angry, not embarrassed, just assessing. She remembered another ballroom, Charlotte, 1999, where at 19 she'd been told her scholarship invitation must have been a clerical error. "Not your circle," a host had said then, adjusting cufflinks like punctuation. She had walked out without protest and built a circle, so wide it made rooms like this feel small. The frosting cooled against her skin. She took out her phone. "Ethan," she said quietly, voice even. "Initiate protocol eclipse." On the other end, her chief of staff did not ask for clarification. "Confirmed," he replied. "Standing by." Victoria misread the calm as confusion. "Security can escort you to the service entrance," she said, gesturing with a manicured hand. A uniformed guard stepped forward, hesitated at Naomi's gaze, then stopped short as if an invisible line had been drawn. The LED wall flickered, not dramatically, just a blink that most would miss. Then the sponsorship ribbon along the bottom changed. Novacor Systems, funding status, under review. A ripple moved through the front tables. The retired senator leaned toward his aide. "What's that?" he asked. The aide was already checking his phone. Naomi stepped toward the stairs to the stage. "No rush. No theatrics. You might want to hold the award," she said, her voice steady enough to carry without the mic. Victoria laughed, brittle. "We'll proceed as scheduled." The LED wall blinked again. Novacor Systems, funding status, withdrawn. The band faltered. Somewhere near the bar, a glass met marble with a small, decisive sound. Phones lifted like periscopes. The MC's smile dissolved. "Is this a tech glitch?" he asked no one in particular. In the control booth, A production manager stared at a dashboard that had just turned a polite shade of red. The foundation's primary liquidity line, secured against NovaCore's endowment pledge, had been paused pending board review. It wasn't a tantrum. It was a mechanism. Naomi reached the podium and took the microphone with a courtesy nod. Frosting still marked her cheek. A quiet testimony to the last 10 minutes. You just humiliated the largest financial backer of this foundation, she said. The room inhaled. NovaCore committed $4.2 billion to this initiative, capital structured to modernize community clinics across 12 states. That commitment required governance standards. She glanced at Victoria, not with malice, but with clarity. Standards include how we treat people in this room. Victoria's color shifted. This is outrageous, she whispered, though the mic caught it anyway. Naomi continued. Protocol Eclipse suspends our capital deployment when reputational risk exceeds threshold. She let the sentence settle. It did. Effective immediately, we are reviewing all sponsorships and board appointments. The LED wall updated again. Board vote, emergency session initiated. A text alert chimed in a dozen tuxedo pockets. Daniel, the event coordinator, felt his pulse in his throat. The junior associate from Chicago whispered, I told you. The retired senator straightened his tie and recalculated his evening. Naomi set the microphone back into its cradle with a soft click. Ceremony is not ownership, she said. Access is not authority. She turned toward the steps. The guard stepped aside fully now, not instructed, just aware. Victoria's voice followed, smaller than before. You set this up, she accused. Naomi paused halfway down the stairs. No, she said, not unkindly. I showed up. The control booth phone rang. On the LED wall, the foundation's logo shrank, replaced by a neutral holding screen. The band stopped entirely. Guests checked their devices as if the floor might tilt. It didn't. It simply shifted. Naomi reached the base of the stage and finally lifted a linen napkin from a nearby table. She wiped her cheek once, precise. Frosting gave way to skin. This isn't about cake, she said, to no one and everyone. It's about culture. Daniel found his voice. Ms. Whitaker, he began, then corrected himself, Naomi. It was the first time anyone had used her name correctly all evening. We're prepared to cooperate, he added, eyes steady. She met his gaze and nodded once. Good, she said. Across the ballroom, Victoria's phone vibrated. She looked down, read, and looked up again as if the room had changed temperature. Emergency board notification, chair review pending. The retired senator's aide leaned in. Sir, this could affect your hospital expansion. He nodded slowly. Then we'd better get this right. Naomi moved toward the exit, measured steps across polished marble. No raised voice. No spectacle. Just a recalibration unfolding in real time. Behind her, the LED wall dimmed to black, then to a message. Event paused pending governance review. The chandeliers still sparkled. The tables still gleamed. But the narrative had shifted, and Naomi Whitaker did not look back. The ballroom did not empty when Naomi Whitaker walked out. It fractured. Conversations broke into urgent whispers, and the kind of laughter that had filled the air 20 minutes earlier dissolved into tight smiles and guarded eye contact. At the far end of the room, the retired senator stepped away from his table and dialed a number he rarely used directly. The band members quietly packed their instruments without being told. The MC stood near the podium staring at the blank LED wall as if it might offer instructions. Victoria Langford remained near center stage, shoulders squared but eyes unsteady, refreshing her phone again and again. The notification banner did not change. Emergency board session confirmed. Chair review pending. She lifted her chin as if posture alone could reverse a financial mechanism already in motion. In the control booth, the production manager wiped his palms on his jacket and reread the message from the foundation's legal counsel. All disbursements suspended until further notice. Do not proceed with award presentation. Await board directive. Daniel Cruz moved quickly now, not as an event coordinator, but as someone who understood that the room had shifted from ceremony to consequence. He approached the podium and lowered the microphone stand so it did not look like a weapon left on a battlefield. He instructed staff to pause beverage service. He asked the catering manager to remain available, but discreet. He was careful with his tone. He had seen Naomi's eyes when she spoke about standards, and he understood that this was not a spectacle. It was a correction. Near the entrance, Naomi stood beneath a mural commissioned to depict the foundation's legacy. She did not rush to her car. She did not huddle with advisors. She waited, phone in hand, listening as Ethan's voice came through the line with the calm cadence of someone who had rehearsed for storms. The withdrawal was processed in tears. The liquidity line had been paused. The next tranche of capital scheduled for community clinic modernization would remain pending until governance compliance was verified. Board attendance? She asked. 92%. Confirmed, Ethan replied. Independent directors are already logging in. Press inquiries are starting. Naomi exhaled once, steady. No statements yet, she said. Let the board speak first. Behind her, the doors to the ballroom opened and closed in uneven rhythms as guests slipped into the corridor, some leaving, others pretending to check on rides while remaining close enough to witness history. Victoria finally stepped down from the stage and crossed the marble floor with measured steps. The silver of her gown caught the chandelier light, but it no longer commanded attention. She stopped 6 feet from Naomi, maintaining distance as if proximity itself might concede ground. You could have handled this privately, she said, voice lowered but sharp. Naomi met her gaze. So could you, she answered. Victoria flinched at the symmetry. This foundation serves millions, she pressed. Your pride should not endanger that. Naomi did not blink. My pride did not freeze funding, she said. Your culture did. The word lingered between them, heavier than any accusation. Daniel approached cautiously. Ms. Langford, he began. The board is requesting your immediate presence in the executive suite upstairs. Victoria hesitated, then nodded once. We will resolve this, she said to Naomi, as if resolution were a matter of persuasion. Naomi inclined her head slightly. I hope so, she replied. For the clinics. Victoria turned and walked toward the private elevator, her heels echoing across marble that now sounded less like applause and more like accounting. In the ballroom, a young physician from Detroit sat at table 9, staring at her phone. The clinic she ran depended on the modernization grant scheduled for next quarter. She scrolled through Novacor's public filings, reading about the conditions attached to capital deployment, governance integrity, community equity, anti-discrimination compliance. She looked up and saw Naomi still near the mural. The physician stood and approached, her voice careful but urgent. My clinic serves 8,000 patients a month, she said. We cannot afford delays. Naomi listened without interruption. Nor can we afford systems that undermine the people they claim to help, she replied. The funds are not gone. They are paused until the board affirms standards. The physician searched her face for doubt and found none. Will you protect the clinics? She asked. That is the only reason I am here, Naomi said. The physician nodded slowly and returned to her table with a steadier breath. Upstairs, the executive suite doors closed behind Victoria as board members appeared on a wall of screens. Some faces were pale, others stern, a few quietly impressed. The independent director from Boston spoke first. We have received footage, he said. The incident reflects a lapse in conduct incompatible with our charter. Victoria began to respond, but another director interrupted. This is not about optics, she said. It is about governance risk. On the screen, a compliance officer outlined the capital structure Novacor had provided. The modernization initiative was not a donation. It was a structured partnership contingent on measurable standards. A breach of those standards triggered automatic review. The language had been signed by the board months earlier. Victoria's confidence thinned as the legal counsel summarized potential exposure. Reputational damage, donor attrition, regulatory scrutiny. The chair's role, once ceremonial, now looked operationally fragile. Back downstairs, the band members lingered near the stage, unsure whether to leave or wait. Guests formed small constellations of speculation. Some criticized Naomi for public escalation. Others admitted, quietly, that they had laughed too quickly. Daniel moved through the room answering questions he could not fully answer, his tone careful, his posture aligned with something steadier than event logistics. Naomi's phone vibrated again. Ethan's voice returned. Media vans are arriving, he said. Local and national. Naomi watched through the glass doors as headlights lined the curb. No interviews tonight, she said. Release a statement that emphasizes patient care and governance standards. She paused. and thanked Daniel Cruz for maintaining professionalism. Daniel, unaware that his name had just been elevated, continued directing staff to offer water and reassurance rather than excuses. He caught Naomi's eye once and nodded, a silent acknowledgement that the evening had changed him as well. The elevator doors opened upstairs. Victoria stepped out first, shoulders still squared, but eyes no longer certain. Behind her, the interim board chair followed with a folder in hand. They moved to the railing overlooking the ballroom. The interim chair cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, voice amplified by the room's acoustics rather than a microphone. Conversation slowed. "The board has initiated a governance review effective immediately. Ms. Langford will step aside pending that review." The words landed with the quiet force of inevitability. Victoria's jaw tightened, but she did not protest. She understood the math. Naomi did not look triumphant. She looked resolved. The interim chair continued. "Our partnership with Novacor remains under active discussion. Patient services will not be disrupted." The physician from Detroit closed her eyes briefly in relief. Naomi stepped forward just enough to be seen, but not to dominate the balcony. "We will work through the night if necessary," she said, voice carrying without strain. "The clinics will be funded. The standards will be met." A murmur moved through the room, not applause but agreement. The chandeliers still shimmered. The tables still gleamed. But the meaning of the space had shifted. Ceremony had given way to accountability. Naomi's phone buzzed one final time that hour. Ethan's message was simple. "Independent directors request your presence upstairs." She looked at the balcony, then at the mural, then at the doors where cameras waited. She chose the stairs that led upward, not because she needed a stage, but because systems change from the inside, and she intended to rewrite this one line by line. The staircase to the executive suite curved like a question mark, quiet and deliberate, and Naomi Whitaker climbed it without looking back at the ballroom below. The marble steps did not echo under her heels. They absorbed the sound, the way institutions absorb stories until someone insists on telling them out loud. Upstairs, the doors to the suite stood open. Inside, 12 board members sat around a polished walnut table beneath recessed lighting that felt colder than the chandeliers downstairs. Screens along the wall displayed financial dashboards, legal summaries, and a paused feed from the ballroom cameras. Victoria Langford stood near the far window, no longer framed by spotlight, just another figure in a room governed by numbers. The interim chair, Harold Benton, motioned for Naomi to take the seat at the head of the table. It was not ceremonial. It was practical. "We need clarity," he said, folding his hands. Naomi remained standing for a moment, surveying the room as if committing it to memory. "Clarity begins with language," she replied. Tonight was not a misunderstanding. It was a demonstration of culture. And culture is measurable. A few directors shifted in their seats. The compliance officer pulled up the partnership agreement between the Foundation and Novacor Systems. Paragraph 9 outlined conduct standards tied directly to capital release. Paragraph 11 detailed escalation protocols, including the mechanism Naomi had activated. "Protocol eclipse," Harold said quietly, as if testing the weight of the phrase. "It is not punitive," Naomi said. "It is protective. The clinics we are modernizing depend on public trust. Trust depends on how we treat people when we think no one important is watching." Victoria's jaw tightened. "You embarrassed this foundation in front of donors and media," she said, her voice controlled but strained. Naomi turned to her. "You embarrassed it first," she answered. Silence settled over the table, not explosive, but conclusive. On one of the screens, a live feed showed media vans lining the curb, cameras angled toward the entrance. The legal counsel adjusted her glasses. "If funding remains suspended," she said, "we face operational strain within 30 days. Naomi nodded. "Then let us prevent strain," she replied. "Reinstate funding contingent on immediate governance reform." Harold leaned forward. "Define reform." Naomi did not hesitate. "First, an independent oversight committee with authority to audit conduct complaints and publish findings quarterly. Second, mandatory equity and leadership training for all board members and executive staff, delivered by an external firm. Third, a transparent grievance channel accessible to staff, partners, and beneficiaries, with response timelines measured in days, not months. Fourth, a temporary step aside by the current chair pending review. Victoria inhaled sharply. You cannot dictate internal leadership, she said. Naomi's expression did not change. I am not dictating, she said. I am conditioning capital. There is a difference. The distinction landed. Conditioning capital was not coercion. It was governance. The independent director from Boston spoke again. If we accept these terms, funding resumes? Naomi inclined her head. Immediately, she said. $4.2 billion remains committed to community clinic modernization. It is not personal. It is structural. The physician from Detroit appeared briefly on the live feed downstairs, speaking to a reporter about patient needs. The image flickered off as the compliance officer switched screens. Harold exhaled slowly. We vote, he said. One by one, hands rose around the table. Some hesitated. Most did not. The tally reached the required threshold. Harold turned to Victoria. Effective immediately, he said. You will step aside pending independent review. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Victoria's shoulders lowered a fraction, the first visible sign of the evening's weight. She looked at Naomi not with anger now, but with something closer to recognition. You could have warned me, she said quietly. Naomi met her gaze. I did, she replied. The memory of frosting on fabric hung unspoken between them. The legal counsel began drafting the formal resolution. Screens updated in real time. Funding status, reinstated conditional. Governance reform, initiated. Downstairs, a murmur moved through the ballroom as guests refreshed their devices and saw the change. The band members paused mid-exit, glancing at each other. Daniel Cruz received a message from his supervisor instructing him to prepare a brief statement for attendees. He straightened his jacket and returned to the stage, this time with steadier hands. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice amplified. The Foundation is implementing immediate governance reforms in partnership with NovaCore Systems. Patient services will continue without interruption. Applause rose, tentative at first, then fuller. It was not applause for spectacle. It was relief. Upstairs, Naomi finally took her seat at the head of the table, not as conqueror, but as partner. Transparency is not a threat, she said. It is a safeguard. Harold nodded. We should issue a joint statement, he said. Naomi agreed. Focus on clinics, she replied. Focus on standards. Leave personalities out of it. Victoria remained by the window, watching the media lights flash against the glass. For the first time that night, her reflection did not look invincible. It looked human. I built this foundation to honor my family, she said, almost to herself. Naomi responded without softness and without cruelty. Then honor it properly, she said. The compliance officer finalized the reform timeline. Training sessions scheduled within 72 hours. Oversight committee appointments to be announced within 1 week. Quarterly reports to begin next quarter. Each item appeared on the screen like a new architecture forming in real time. Harold extended his hand across the table. Naomi shook it once, firm and brief. It was not a truce. It was alignment. Downstairs, the physician from Detroit checked her phone again and saw the confirmation. Funding resumed. Conditions attached. She closed her eyes for a moment, not in exhaustion, but in gratitude. Daniel concluded his statement and stepped aside. The band resumed a softer tune, this time not for celebration, but for continuity. Guests began to settle back into their seats, conversations quieter, more deliberate. No one mentioned cake anymore. They mentioned governance. They mentioned standards. They mentioned oversight. The narrative had shifted permanently. Upstairs, the board adjourned with paperwork in motion and egos recalibrated. Victoria left the suite without spectacle, escorted not by security, but by silence. Naomi remained for a final moment, reviewing the resolution draft. Ethan's voice came through her phone once more. Media is requesting comment, he said. Naomi stood and walked toward the balcony overlooking the ballroom. She did not descend. She simply observed as guests resumed dinner under chandeliers that now seemed less decorative and more accountable. Release the statement, she said. Emphasize partnership. Emphasize patience. Emphasize reform. She paused. And make sure Daniel Cruz is acknowledged for professionalism under pressure. Ethan confirmed. Naomi slipped her phone into her bag and looked across the room one last time. Power had not raised its voice tonight. It had raised its standards. And in doing so, it had rewritten the architecture of a foundation that would never again confuse ceremony with control. By the time midnight brushed against the city skyline, the ballroom no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a boardroom that had expanded to include everyone. The chandeliers still cast warm light across linen and crystal, but the conversations beneath them had shifted from gossip to governance. Naomi Whitaker remained on the upper balcony for a moment longer, watching as waitstaff moved with renewed purpose and guests resumed their seats not out of obligation, but out of reflection. The LED wall behind the stage now displayed a simple message in clean gold lettering: Partnership for Patient Care and Governance Reform. No logos larger than the other. No names elevated above the mission. Downstairs, Daniel Cruz reviewed the joint statement on his tablet before sending it to the media contacts waiting outside. His hands no longer trembled. The statement did not mention embarrassment. It did not mention cake. It spoke about standards, about oversight, about the responsibility of institutions to align ceremony with conduct. Within minutes, notifications spread across financial networks and healthcare forums. Nova Core Systems reinstates $4.2 billion commitment conditional on governance reform. The headline carried weight without spectacle. In the executive suite, Harold Benton remained seated after the others had left, reading through the reform timeline once more. Training sessions within 72 hours. Independent Oversight Committee announced within 7 days. Quarterly transparency reports beginning next quarter. He looked toward the empty chair where Victoria had sat, and then toward the doorway where Naomi had exited moments earlier. Leadership, he realized, was not inherited. It was demonstrated. Victoria, now, in a smaller conference room down the hall, stared at her reflection in a darkened window. The evening replayed in fragments. The microphone, the laughter, the pause in the band. The moment the LED wall changed. She had always believed control meant staying ahead of narrative. Tonight she had learned that narrative follows behavior. Her phone buzzed with messages from family members, from donors, from acquaintances who suddenly used careful language. She did not respond. Instead, she opened the foundation charter and reread the mission statement her grandfather had written decades earlier. Service without prejudice. Opportunity without barrier. The words felt heavier now, not because they had changed, but because she had. Downstairs, the physician from Detroit approached Naomi near the exit as guests began to collect their coats. "Thank you," she said simply. Naomi looked at her, not with triumph, but with recognition. "Make sure your clinic submits its updated infrastructure plan by Friday," she replied. "The Oversight Committee will prioritize facilities serving high-volume communities." The physician nodded, understanding that reform was not symbolic. It was operational. Cameras flashed near the entrance as reporters attempted to capture a statement. Naomi did not step into the glare. She allowed the joint release to speak. Ethan's voice came through her phone one more time that night. "Market reaction is steady," he said. "Investors appreciate the conditional structure. Healthcare analysts are praising the governance emphasis." Naomi glanced back at the ballroom. "Good," she replied. "Let them focus on patients." As she stepped outside, cool night air replaced the warmth of chandeliers. The city hummed in the distance, unaware that inside one building, a foundation had shifted course. Media lights reflected off polished black cars lining the curb. A reporter called her name, but she raised a hand gently and continued walking. She did not need a soundbite. Her presence had already spoken. Inside, Daniel supervised the final logistics of the evening. Guests who had once measured status by seating charts now discussed oversight structures and equity benchmarks. A retired executive remarked that he had never seen capital move so quickly in response to conduct. Another donor admitted quietly that he had laughed at the wrong moment and would not do so again. Culture was not corrected by apology alone. It was corrected by consequence. In the executive suite, Harold drafted a personal letter to all board members emphasizing that leadership positions would now require annual governance certification. He paused before sending it, aware that some would resist. But resistance was no longer the foundation's default setting. Down the hall, Victoria closed the foundation charter and stood. She would step aside publicly in the morning. The press would frame it as temporary. The board would call it prudent. She understood now that authority without humility erodes from within. As the final guests exited the ballroom, the band packed their instruments once more, this time with lighter expressions. The LED wall dimmed to black. then to a soft image of a community clinic blueprint, architectural lines stretching across the screen like a promise being redrawn. Naomi paused at the edge of the sidewalk before entering her car. She looked up at the building's facade, at the windows glowing against the night. Power had not required shouting. It had required clarity. She remembered the scholarship gala in Charlotte decades earlier, the quiet humiliation that had followed her home like a shadow. That shadow no longer dictated rooms she entered. She had learned to build rooms instead. Ethan sent one final update. Oversight committee nominees confirmed, he said. First meeting scheduled for 9 a.m. Naomi smiled faintly. Reform did not sleep. It began immediately. As her car pulled away from the curb, reporters continued to speculate about personal rivalries and dramatic moments. But the real story was unfolding in spreadsheets and training modules and clinic blueprints. Inside the foundation building, staff members began reorganizing files, preparing documentation for review. Daniel locked the ballroom doors and stood alone for a moment beneath the now quiet chandeliers. He thought about the instant the LED wall had changed and realized that leadership was not about occupying the stage. It was about transforming it. Upstairs, Harold sent his letter. Victoria stepped into the elevator without ceremony. The blueprint remained glowing softly on the LED wall, a reminder that institutions are not marble and crystal. They are choices. And that night, under 40-foot ceilings and in front of cameras and critics alike, a choice had been made to align power with principle. The city continued humming, unaware that one foundation had rewritten its own architecture in a single evening. But those who had stood beneath those chandeliers would remember the moment when laughter turned into accountability and ceremony gave way to standards. And in that memory, the meaning of power would never again be mistaken for decoration. By sunrise the next morning, the city had already decided what to call it. Headlines stretched across financial news tickers and healthcare forums, some dramatic, some analytical, all circling the same conclusion. Capital had spoken, and it had spoken in full sentences. Naomi Whitaker stood in her corner office at Nova Core Systems watching the skyline shift from gray to gold. She had not slept more than 3 hours, but her posture did not show fatigue. On the wall behind her, 3 screens displayed live updates. Governance Reform Implementation Timeline. Oversight Committee Nominees. Clinic Modernization Rollout Map. The numbers were steady. Markets had not panicked. Investors had not fled. Instead, analysts were calling the move disciplined, strategic, necessary. Ethan entered with a tablet in hand. The foundation board is assembled in the main conference room, he said. Victoria issued her public statement at 6:30 a.m. Naomi turned slightly. Tone? She asked. Ethan nodded once. Measured. She acknowledged misalignment and endorsed reform. Naomi absorbed that without visible reaction. Good, she said. Then we proceed. At 9 a.m. sharp, the Oversight Committee convened for its first meeting. Not in the ballroom, not under chandeliers, but in a glass conference room overlooking the river, where transparency was architectural. Daniel Cruz sat near the end of the table, no longer just an event coordinator, but newly appointed Director of Governance Operations for the Foundation. His promotion had been confirmed at dawn. Across from him sat 2 independent auditors, a healthcare policy expert, and a physician from Detroit who now served as a community advisor. Naomi entered without entourage and took her seat at the head of the table. There were no cameras, no applause, only documents. We begin with conduct reporting mechanisms, she said. Every complaint must have a response timeline of no more than 7 business days. The healthcare policy expert nodded. And public quarterly summaries? She asked. Naomi agreed. Transparency must be visible. Daniel spoke carefully. We also need staff-level training within 72 hours, not just board certification. Naomi looked at him and gave a small nod. Draft the curriculum with the external firm, she said. No internal shortcuts. The meeting moved swiftly, not because it was easy, but because the framework was clear. Downstairs in the foundation building, employees gathered in small clusters reading the reform announcement posted on the internal network. Some felt anxious, others relieved. A receptionist who had once witnessed smaller slights now saw language that protected her as well. Words like accountability and reporting channel were no longer abstract. They were policy. Across town, Victoria Langford sat at her kitchen table with a copy of the Foundation Charter open beside her. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, illuminating family portraits on the wall. She reread her public statement, then set the phone aside. For the first time in years, her schedule was empty. Authority had been replaced with reflection. She remembered the moment on stage, the laughter, the assumption. She had believed it harmless. Now she understood that harm did not require intention. It required impact. Back at NovaCore headquarters, Ethan briefed Naomi on media sentiment. Healthcare leaders are praising the oversight structure, he said. Some commentators say this sets a new precedent for philanthropic governance. Naomi turned from the window and faced him fully. It should not be precedent, she said. It should be standard. He nodded. Investors agree. By noon, the Oversight Committee released its first action memo. All prior conduct complaints from the last 3 years would be reviewed independently. Staff members were invited to submit additional feedback through an anonymous digital portal. Training sessions were scheduled for the following Monday. Each item was specific, measurable, operational. In the Detroit clinic, the physician gathered her team around a small break room table. Funding is confirmed, she told them. But there will be new reporting requirements. No one complained. They had long wanted a system that listened as much as it funded. Back at the Foundation building, Daniel walked through the now quiet ballroom where the previous night had unfolded. The LED wall had been replaced with a slide outlining reform milestones. He paused beneath the chandeliers and remembered the exact second the funding status changed. That moment had not been about humiliation. It had been about calibration. He understood now that leadership was not about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about aligning the room with its own stated values. Upstairs, the independent auditors began reviewing archived emails and event protocols. They were not searching for scandal. They were searching for patterns. Naomi joined them briefly, not to supervise, but to signal commitment. Every institution has blind spots, she said. Our responsibility is to correct them. One auditor looked up. Most leaders resist this level of scrutiny, she observed. Naomi smiled faintly. Most leaders mistake scrutiny for attack, she replied. It is correction. In her home across town, Victoria closed the Foundation Charter and stood. She had agreed to participate in the training sessions as part of the reform conditions. Pride had been replaced with perspective. She drafted a message to the board expressing support for the Oversight Committee and requesting a personal meeting with Naomi. It was not an apology drafted for headlines. It was a conversation she now understood she owed. That afternoon, the joint statement from NovaCore and the Foundation was featured on national business networks. Analysts highlighted the conditional funding model as a blueprint for responsible philanthropy. Social media commentary shifted from spectacle to substance. The narrative was no longer about a moment on stage. It was about governance. In her office, Naomi received a calendar request from Victoria. She studied it for a moment, then accepted. Change required more than public resolutions. It required dialogue. As the sun dipped toward late afternoon, the first oversight training session materials were finalized. Slides outlined behavioral expectations. Case studies detailed how assumptions create exclusion. Metrics defined what accountability looked like in measurable terms. Daniel reviewed the presentation and felt a sense of purpose that had not existed 24 hours earlier. Down the hall, staff members signed up for sessions voluntarily. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of culture again. At 5 p.m., Naomi stepped out onto the balcony of her office building overlooking the river. The city moved steadily below her. Traffic lights changed. Pedestrians crossed streets unaware of the governance architecture being rewritten inside boardrooms. She reflected not on the confrontation itself, but on the mechanism that followed. Protocol Eclipse had not been designed for drama. It had been designed for integrity. And integrity, once activated, does not apologize for existing. Ethan joined her quietly. You changed more than one foundation last night, he said. Naomi did not look away from the horizon. No, she replied. The foundation changed itself. It just needed a mirror. The river below carried reflections of glass and steel, steady and unhurried. Institutions, she knew, moved the same way. Slowly, until they did not. And in that shift, in that recalibration of power and principle, a lesson had been written into policy rather than applause. The chandeliers would shine again. At future galas, music would resume. Awards would be given. But beneath the light and linen, a new architecture would hold the room together. One built not on assumption, but on accountability. And that architecture would endure long after headlines faded. 3 days later, the ballroom lights turned on again. But this time there were no chandeliers sparkling for donors, and no string quartet rehearsing beneath gold-trimmed ceilings. There were folding chairs arranged in precise rows, a projector humming softly, and a screen that read in simple black lettering, Governance and Equity Certification Session 1. Naomi Whitaker stood near the back of the room as foundation staff filtered in, some in tailored suits, others in modest office attire, all aware that the architecture of their institution had shifted. No one laughed too loudly. No one whispered carelessly. The atmosphere was not tense. It was attentive. Daniel Cruz moved between rows distributing printed materials. He no longer carried the posture of someone waiting for instruction. He carried the posture of someone implementing it. The oversight committee sat along the side wall, observing not as enforcers, but as stewards. At precisely 9 a.m., the external facilitator, Dr. Renee Caldwell, stepped forward. She did not begin with accusation. She began with a question. "What is culture?" she asked. Silence lingered for a moment before someone near the front answered softly. "The way we do things." Dr. Caldwell nodded. "And who decides that?" she continued. Eyes shifted. No one responded immediately. Naomi watched without interrupting. Leadership did not always speak first. It created space. Dr. Caldwell advanced the slide. Culture is a pattern of behavior reinforced by power. The words appeared plain, but they carried weight. Staff members took notes. Some glanced toward the balcony where, days earlier, ceremony had been interrupted by consequence. The facilitator moved through case studies, scenarios where assumptions shaped access, where laughter masked exclusion, where silence protected hierarchy. She did not reference the gala. She did not need to. The room understood the context without being told. At mid-morning, Victoria Langford entered quietly and took a seat in the third row. Conversations paused for a fraction of a second, then resumed. She did not wear silver. She wore navy. No microphone. No spotlight. Just a printed packet resting in her lap. Naomi noticed, but did not react. Reform required participation, not humiliation. Dr. Caldwell divided the room into discussion groups. Daniel found himself seated across from Victoria, along with 2 junior staff members and the Detroit physician attending remotely on a screen at the table's center. The prompt on the slide read, "Describe a moment when authority was mistaken for entitlement." Silence returned, heavier this time. A junior coordinator spoke first, voice tentative. "Sometimes we assume someone does not belong because they do not fit the image we expect," she said. Daniel nodded slowly. Victoria kept her eyes on the table for a moment before lifting them. "Authority can make assumptions feel harmless," she said. "They are not." The room did not gasp. It absorbed the admission. Across town at NovaCore headquarters, Ethan monitored attendance metrics and feedback surveys streaming in real time. Participation rates were high. Completion acknowledgments were being logged digitally. Naomi had insisted that certification be documented, not symbolic. She stepped forward only once during the session, not to lecture, but to clarify. "Standards protect everyone," she said. "They protect staff from bias. They protect leadership from blind spots. They protect communities from exclusion." Her voice did not rise. It carried because it did not need volume. By noon, the first training module concluded. Certificates were not yet issued. Assessment quizzes would follow. Compliance was measured, not assumed. In the break room, staff members spoke in quieter tones than usual, but there was no resentment in their voices. There was recognition. One employee remarked that the anonymous reporting portal already contained submissions from years past. Another said she had hesitated to speak up before, but now felt seen. Daniel listened, aware that his own trajectory had shifted in less than 72 hours. He had once managed seating charts. Now he managed systems. Upstairs in a smaller conference room, the oversight committee reviewed early feedback. Satisfaction scores were high. Areas of discomfort were noted. Dr. Caldwell recommended additional modules focusing on unconscious bias in donor interactions. Naomi agreed immediately. "Discomfort is not failure," she said. "It is growth." Victoria requested a private meeting later that afternoon. Naomi accepted without hesitation. They met not in the executive suite, but in a modest conference room overlooking the river. No cameras. No observers. Victoria began without defensiveness. I believed I was protecting an image, she said. I did not realize I was undermining a mission. Naomi listened, hands folded on the table. Image without integrity collapses, she replied. Mission without humility drifts. Victoria exhaled slowly. I will complete every module, she said. Not because it is required. Because it is overdue. Naomi regarded her carefully. Reform is not about punishment, she said. It is about alignment. The conversation did not end in dramatic reconciliation. It ended in acknowledgement. That was enough. By late afternoon, assessment results began populating dashboards. Most staff passed the first module. A few required review. Daniel compiled a report summarizing participation, engagement, and recommendations. He sent it to both the board and NovaCore leadership. Transparency was no longer optional. It was embedded. Downstairs, the ballroom remained quiet, chairs neatly stacked after the session. The LED wall displayed a rotating schedule of upcoming training dates and oversight milestones. Gone were the oversized logos and ornate graphics. In their place were timelines and accountability markers. The transformation was not aesthetic. It was structural. At sunset, Naomi stood once more at the foundation entrance, observing staff leave the building with a different posture than the one she had seen at the gala. There was no spectacle tonight. No cameras waiting. Just people carrying binders and laptops, aware that their workplace had entered a new chapter. Ethan approached with the final update of the day. 98% completion rate for Module 1, he said. Naomi nodded. And the clinics? She asked. Infrastructure planning calls confirmed, he replied. Funding transfers scheduled. She allowed herself a brief, almost invisible smile. Reform and service were moving in parallel. As darkness settled over the city, the foundation building glowed softly against the skyline. Inside, systems were being rewritten line by line. Policies were no longer decorative clauses buried in charters. They were active mechanisms. In a quiet office upstairs, Victoria completed the final question of her assessment module and submitted it without fanfare. She understood now that leadership was not secured by inheritance or applause. It was secured by accountability. And accountability, once embraced, does not diminish authority. It refines it. Across the river, traffic flowed steadily, unaware of the recalibration that had taken place within one institution's walls. But those who had gathered beneath chandeliers days earlier would never forget the moment when power was measured not by spotlight, but by standards. And in that measurement, a foundation had learned that dignity is not granted by invitation. It is protected by policy. 1 week later, the first quarterly transparency dashboard went live at exactly 8 a.m., and it did not arrive with music or marble or ceremony. It arrived as data. On the Foundation website, a new tab appeared, Governance and Accountability Reports. Within minutes, healthcare administrators, donors, journalists, and employees began clicking through charts that detailed complaint submissions, response timelines, training completion percentages, and infrastructure disbursement schedules. There were no vague summaries. There were metrics. Response time average, 4.8 business days. Training completion rate, 99%. Oversight committee attendance, 100%. Naomi Whitaker reviewed the dashboard from her office, not with satisfaction, but with scrutiny. Reform was not a headline. It was maintenance. Ethan stood beside her, scrolling through media reactions. Financial networks are calling this the most transparent philanthropic restructuring in recent years, he said. Naomi nodded once. Good, she replied. Transparency should become ordinary. Across town at the Foundation building, Daniel Cruz watched traffic on the internal portal spike as staff members logged in to read the same report. There was no panic in the hallways, no whispers of instability. Instead, there was a steady current of awareness. Employees now understood how their conduct connected directly to capital, and how capital connected directly to patient care. The Detroit physician joined a virtual town hall that afternoon, where oversight committee members answered questions in real time. One staff member asked whether disciplinary measures would be public. The independent auditor responded clearly. Patterns will be published. Individuals will be protected unless misconduct requires disclosure. The room absorbed the nuance. Accountability did not mean spectacle. It meant structure. Victoria Langford attended the town hall from her home office. She did not sit in the front row anymore, but she did not hide either. Her certification badge from the training module rested in a folder on her desk, not as decoration, but as documentation. When the chat window opened for comments, she typed a single sentence. Reform is not a threat to tradition. It is its preservation. The message scrolled among dozens of others, unhighlighted, unannounced, but present. At NovaCore headquarters, analysts prepared the next phase of clinic modernization funding. Conditional structures remained intact, but no further triggers had activated. Ethan briefed Naomi on site inspections scheduled for facilities in Ohio, Michigan, and Texas. Oversight members will attend randomly, he said. Naomi approved. Visibility reinforces trust, she replied. That afternoon, Daniel received a message from a junior receptionist who had submitted one of the first anonymous reports through the new portal. She requested a follow-up conversation. In a quiet conference room, she explained that previous supervisors had dismissed concerns about donor interactions. Daniel listened without interruption, then outlined the new response protocol step by step. 7 business days for acknowledgement. 14 days for review. Documentation archived digitally. She left the room with a lighter posture than when she entered. The system had heard her. Meanwhile, in the Foundation boardroom, Harold Benton convened a brief session to evaluate the reform's early impact. Donor retention remains stable, he reported. Community partnerships have increased inquiries. A board member who had once resisted oversight cleared his throat. Perhaps we underestimated the appetite for accountability, he admitted. No one argued. Culture had recalibrated quietly, but decisively. As evening approached, Naomi traveled to one of the clinics slated for modernization, a brick building on the edge of a busy urban corridor. She walked through hallways lined with aging equipment and met nurses who spoke about patient volumes exceeding 8,000 visits a month. She did not arrive with cameras. She arrived with blueprints. The first infrastructure transfer will clear within 72 hours, she told the clinic director. But quarterly reporting will be mandatory. The director nodded without hesitation. We welcome it, he said. Back at the Foundation building, Victoria met with 2 former donors who had expressed concern about public perception. She did not defend herself. She explained the oversight structure in detail, outlining training modules and reporting channels. We are stronger because we were corrected, she said. The donors listened, surprised by the absence of defensiveness. Reform had not diminished the institution's standing. It had refined it. Later that night, Daniel walked once more through the ballroom, where folding chairs had replaced gala tables. The LED wall now displayed upcoming clinic milestones and oversight deadlines in equal-size font. He remembered the laughter that once echoed here and compared it to the quiet diligence now filling the space. Power, he realized, had not disappeared. It had matured. Across the city, commentators debated whether conditional funding would become a broader model in corporate philanthropy. Some praised it as necessary evolution. Others called it risky. Naomi read none of the commentary before bed. She reviewed instead the site inspection schedule for the next week and the Oversight Committee agenda. Her focus remained operational. The following morning, the first independent audit report was delivered to her inbox. It detailed 3 minor procedural lapses in donor event protocol and recommended immediate correction. Naomi forwarded it to Harold with a single line: implement without delay. Within hours, policy language was updated and distributed foundation-wide. There was no argument. There was no resistance. Compliance had become habit. In Detroit, construction crews began measuring clinic hallways for updated equipment installations funded by the reinstated capital. The physician watched as blueprints were unrolled across folding tables. She understood that the oversight language attached to the funding was not an obstacle. It was a safeguard. Back at NovaCore, Ethan summarized the week's developments. Market stability maintained. Reform implementation on schedule. No new incidents reported. Naomi listened, then looked out at the skyline once more. A week earlier, laughter had filled a ballroom and assumptions had framed access. Now dashboards tracked conduct, clinics prepared for renovation, and oversight meetings filled calendars where galas once dominated. The shift had not required shouting. It had required standards. And standards, once codified, do not fade with headlines. They embed themselves in daily routine. As twilight settled over the river, lights illuminated office windows across the city. Inside one of those buildings, a foundation that once relied on ceremony now relied on structure. Inside another, a technology company continued aligning capital with conscience. And between them flowed a current stronger than spectacle, accountability measured in days, dollars, and documented change. The chandeliers would shine again one day, but beneath their glow would stand policies that no longer bent to assumption. In that quiet recalibration, power had found its proper shape, not as decoration, but as discipline. 2 weeks after the dashboard went live, the first unannounced site audit took place at 7:45 in the morning under a sky still streaked with pale gray. Naomi Whitaker did not announce her arrival. She stepped into the Ohio clinic wearing the same understated black she had worn at the gala. No entourage, no cameras, just a leather folder tucked beneath her arm. Construction crews were already inside measuring door frames to ensure new diagnostic equipment would fit without violating accessibility codes. The clinic director looked up in surprise, but not in fear. "You did not have to come in person," he said. Naomi's gaze moved across the waiting area where patients sat quietly, flipping through worn magazines. "Yes, I did," she replied. Oversight, she believed, was not effective from behind glass walls alone. It required presence. She walked through exam rooms where new wiring was being installed and paused beside a nurse updating intake forms on a tablet. "How is the reporting system?" she asked. The nurse nodded. "Clear," she answered. 7-day response policy has already made a difference. Naomi made a note in her folder. Across the state line in Michigan, the Detroit physician joined a virtual oversight review call. The agenda was direct. Infrastructure progress, complaint resolution metrics, staff training compliance. The independent auditor presented data without flourish. "Response time average has dropped to 3.9 business days," she reported. 0 unresolved cases beyond the 14-day review window. The numbers were not celebrated. They were verified. In the foundation boardroom back in the city, Harold Benton adjusted his glasses as he reviewed the same report projected on a wall-sized monitor. Victoria Langford sat 3 seats down, not as chair, but as participating member under review. When discussion turned to donor event protocols, she spoke without hesitation. "All future events will require conduct orientation prior to attendance," she said. A board member raised an eyebrow. "For guests?" he asked. Victoria nodded. "Yes," she replied. "Standards do not stop at the door." The room fell quiet for a moment, absorbing the implication. Naomi listened through a secure audio feed while standing in the Ohio clinic hallway. Reform had moved beyond reaction. It was shaping policy. Ethan texted her a summary of media sentiment. Analysts had begun citing the oversight model in business school case studies. Some corporate leaders had reached out requesting consultation on conditional funding structures. Naomi typed back a single instruction: schedule exploratory call. But she did not allow momentum to dilute focus. Inside the clinic, she stopped near the reception desk where a community volunteer was assisting elderly patients with digital check-in. "Has anyone explained the grievance portal to them?" Naomi asked. The volunteer smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Printed guides are in English and Spanish." Naomi inclined her head. Access was not meaningful if it was not understandable. That afternoon, Daniel Cruz facilitated the second training module inside the foundation ballroom. Attendance remained high. This session focused on implicit bias in donor interactions and beneficiary engagement. Dr. Renee Caldwell presented case simulations drawn from anonymized submissions. Staff members engaged with greater openness than before. One senior event planner admitted that she had once prioritized donors over community guests in seating assignments. "I thought it was strategic," she said. "Now I see it was exclusion." Daniel recorded the insight as part of the session summary. Change, he understood, was visible in admission. At the end of the session, certificates were issued digitally, each linked to an employee's performance file. Certification was no longer ceremonial. It was integrated into evaluation criteria. Meanwhile, in a modest conference room overlooking the river, Victoria met with Naomi for their scheduled follow-up conversation. There were no raised voices, no rehearsed apologies. Victoria placed a typed proposal on the table. "I would like to establish a scholarship fund in partnership with the clinics," she said. focused on students from underserved communities pursuing healthcare administration. Naomi read the proposal carefully. Funded personally? She asked. Victoria nodded. Yes, she said. Separate from foundation capital. Naomi studied her for a moment, searching not for performance, but for sincerity. Alignment matters, she said finally. If this fund includes mentorship and governance training, it could create structural change. Victoria's shoulders eased slightly. Then let us build it correctly, she replied. Outside the window, the river moved steadily, indifferent to headlines. Inside, two leaders recalibrated legacy through policy rather than posture. Back at the Ohio clinic, new equipment was delivered by late afternoon. The directors signed off on compliance checklists while construction supervisors documented installation progress with time-stamped photographs. Oversight committee members received automatic notifications as each milestone was completed. Transparency was not an annual event. It was a daily rhythm. In NovaCore headquarters, Ethan compiled a weekly summary for Naomi. 0 new complaints beyond routine submissions, he said. Infrastructure rollout on schedule. Oversight participation remains full. Naomi scanned the report and then closed her laptop. Prepare a site visit to Texas next, she instructed. Momentum required continuity. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the skyline, Daniel remained alone in the ballroom reviewing feedback surveys from the training sessions. One comment stood out. Culture changes when leadership listens. He read it twice before forwarding it to the Oversight Committee. Upstairs, Harold finalized a motion to codify oversight procedures permanently into the Foundation Charter. The amendment would require unanimous board approval. He believed it would pass. Victoria signed her name to the draft without hesitation. Her signature did not restore her previous title. It restored something quieter. Credibility. Across the city, news anchors debated whether conditional philanthropy represented a new era in corporate governance. Naomi did not join the debate. She walked through another clinic corridor, this one in a different state, listening to the steady hum of updated machines and the measured cadence of nurses reviewing patient charts. Reform, she knew, was not complete. It was continuous. The following morning, the charter amendment passed unanimously. Oversight was no longer a temporary measure. It was embedded. Daniel received confirmation and allowed himself a brief smile before returning to scheduling the next certification session. In her home office, Victoria framed the charter amendment beside her grandfather's original mission statement, not as decoration, but as reminder. In her office overlooking the city, Naomi stood once more at the window. Headlines would fade. Case studies would circulate. But what would remain were response timelines, compliance metrics, and clinics equipped to serve communities with dignity. Power had not shouted. It had documented. And in that documentation, institutions had been forced to measure themselves not by spotlight, but by standard. The chandeliers would glow again someday, and when they did, they would illuminate a room governed not by assumption, but by accountability written into policy and practiced in action every single day. 30 days after the first training session, the foundation ballroom filled once more, but this time not with donors or musicians. It filled with community leaders, clinic directors, oversight members, and staff seated side by side, without reserved tiers. The chandeliers still shimmered overhead, but the LED wall displayed something different. First 30-day impact review. No gala graphics. No dramatic music. Just metrics and milestones. Naomi Whitaker stood near the side aisle instead of the stage, allowing the Oversight Committee to present findings independently. The independent auditor stepped forward and spoke in measured tones. Complaint submissions have increased by 20%, she said. A quiet murmur moved through the room. She raised a hand gently. This indicates trust in the reporting system, not deterioration in conduct. The next slide appeared. Response compliance rate, 100% within 7 business days. Infrastructure disbursement progress, 65% completed across 12 clinics. The numbers did not require applause. They required acknowledgement. Daniel Cruz watched from the second row, tablet in hand, tracking questions submitted through the live feedback portal projected. On the screen, transparency was no longer symbolic. It was interactive. A clinic administrator from Texas stood and spoke without microphone hesitation. Our equipment upgrades arrived on schedule, she said. But more importantly, staff feel heard. Her words carried weight because they were not rehearsed. Victoria Langford sat 3 rows behind her, listening without interruption. She no longer scanned the room for approval. She scanned it for alignment. When the Oversight Committee opened the floor for discussion, she raised her hand. I would like to formally recommend that oversight certification become a prerequisite for all future board nominations, she said. The room grew still. Harold Benton looked toward Naomi briefly before responding. Motion acknowledged, he said. We will include it in the amendment review. No one questioned the necessity. Across the river at NovaCore headquarters, Ethan monitored the live stream feed and social engagement metrics. Analysts were commenting on the unprecedented openness of the review. Healthcare policy experts were sharing screenshots of the dashboard in professional forums. Naomi's phone buzzed with requests for interviews. She ignored them. Her attention remained fixed on the foundation ballroom, where culture was being measured in real time. On the LED wall, the next slide displayed a breakdown of anonymous submissions categorized by theme. Donor interaction conduct, staff hierarchy dynamics, community access concerns. Each category included resolution status and corrective action steps. The independent auditor concluded her presentation with a simple sentence. Reform is functioning as designed. It was not celebratory. It was factual. After the session, small groups formed around high tables, not to gossip, but to strategize. Daniel joined a circle of clinic directors discussing implementation challenges in rural counties. A director from Ohio mentioned that internet connectivity issues slowed digital reporting in remote areas. Daniel made a note immediately. We will allocate funding for connectivity upgrades, he said. Infrastructure, he had learned, was not limited to equipment. It included access. Victoria approached Naomi quietly near the back of the room. The scholarship proposal has been approved, she said. Applications open next month. Naomi inclined her head. Include governance training modules for recipients, she replied. Leadership begins early. Victoria nodded. The exchange required no further elaboration. Outside the ballroom, media representatives waited, hoping for a dramatic quote or visible tension. None emerged. The story unfolding inside was procedural, disciplined, steady. That afternoon, Naomi traveled to the Texas clinic referenced during the session. The facility stood near a busy intersection where traffic flowed steadily past brick storefronts. Inside, newly installed diagnostic equipment hummed softly. A nurse demonstrated the upgraded patient intake system, explaining how the digital portal now included a visible grievance submission link on the main screen. Patients see it immediately, she said. Naomi watched as an elderly man navigated the interface with assistance from a volunteer. Access was visible. Back at the foundation building, Harold convened a brief board session to formalize Victoria's recommendation regarding oversight certification for future board members. The vote passed unanimously. The charter amendment required that any nominee complete governance training prior to assuming office. The decision did not spark debate. It reflected evolution. Daniel updated the internal policy documents and distributed the revision foundation-wide. In Detroit, construction crews completed installation of new imaging equipment funded through the reinstated capital. The physician sent Naomi a photograph of the first patient served with the upgraded machine, accompanied by a short message. Efficiency improved. Wait times reduced by 15%. Naomi replied with one line. Document the metrics. Impact, she believed, must be quantifiable. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the skyline, Naomi stood once more at the riverfront outside NovaCore headquarters. The water moved steadily, reflecting office lights beginning to flicker on across the city. 30 days earlier, a single moment had revealed a fracture between ceremony and conduct. Now, policy revisions, infrastructure upgrades, and documented accountability filled calendars and dashboards. Ethan joined her briefly with a final update. Investor confidence remains strong, he said. Case studies circulating in 3 major business schools. Naomi smiled faintly. Let them study structure, not spectacle, she replied. In her home office, Victoria reviewed the scholarship application draft once more. The criteria emphasized leadership potential, community commitment, and completion of governance coursework. She added a final line before sending it to legal counsel. Integrity is not inherited. It is practiced. Across the foundation building, Staff members prepared for the next quarterly review, compiling data and refining reporting templates. There was no fatigue in their movements. There was routine. Routine signaled normalization. Oversight was no longer reactive. It was embedded. At the Ohio clinic, the director closed his office door after a long day and reviewed patient satisfaction surveys. Comments referenced shorter wait times and clearer communication. None mentioned the gala weeks earlier. That memory had transformed into policy rather than lingering. Resentment. As nights settled over the city, the foundation ballroom lights dimmed, leaving the LED wall glowing softly with a single phrase: accountability in action. It was not decorative. It was descriptive. In her office, Naomi closed her laptop and prepared to leave for the evening. Before stepping out, she glanced at the framed architectural blueprint of the first clinic Nova Corps had ever funded. It reminded her that systems, like buildings, require reinforcement after stress. The chandeliers in the ballroom would continue to shine at future events. Awards would be presented, speeches delivered. But beneath every celebration now stood a charter strengthened by oversight and a culture recalibrated by consequence. Power had not shouted. It had restructured. And in that restructuring, institutions learned that dignity is sustained not by applause, but by adherence to standards measured day after day in quiet rooms where policies are written and upheld without spectacle. 60 days after the night that recalibrated everything, the Foundation Ballroom hosted another gathering. But this one carried no illusions. The chandeliers still shimmered overhead. The marble floors still reflected polished shoes. Yet the atmosphere felt different, steadier, grounded in structure rather than spectacle. The LED wall did not display sponsors or decorative emblems. It displayed a live progress tracker titled 60-Day Accountability Review. Naomi Whitaker stood at the center aisle before the session began, not as an honoree, not as a headline, but as a partner observing the system she had insisted be measured. The Oversight Committee assembled at the long table beneath the screen, each member with binders marked with updated compliance data. Harold Benton adjusted his glasses and began the review without flourish. Infrastructure completion across 12 clinics now stands at 88%, he said. The number settled into the room like a solid beam placed into a framework. Applause did not erupt. Instead, pens moved across notebooks. Daniel Cruz projected the next metric. Average grievance response time reduced to 3 business days. Staff certification renewal rate 100%. The numbers spoke with a clarity no speech could replace. A community advisor from Texas stepped forward. Our patient intake process is now audited weekly, she said. We have eliminated the perception of favoritism. Her words carried quiet pride. Victoria Langford listened from the side of the stage, no longer occupying the central seat she once commanded. When the Oversight Committee invited reflections from leadership, she stood. Tradition is not dismantled by reform, she said evenly. It is strengthened by it. The room acknowledged the shift not with shock, but with understanding. Naomi met her gaze briefly, then turned her attention back to the dashboard. Reform was not personal. It was procedural. Outside the building, media vans once again lined the curb, but the questions they prepared to ask were different now. They were no longer about scandal. They were about sustainability. Inside, Ethan monitored a parallel live stream from Nova Corps headquarters where investors observed the accountability review in real time. He sent Naomi a concise message. Market response positive. Long-term projection stable. She did not reply. Her focus remained on the ballroom where charts displayed not image, but impact. The independent auditor advanced to a slide titled Cultural Indicators. Employee feedback confidence score increased by 32%. Donor compliance training attendance 97%. Community advisory board expansion underway. These were not decorative statistics. They were structural markers. After the presentation concluded, Naomi stepped to the microphone only because it was necessary to close the review. Her voice remained even, steady. Accountability is not an event, she said. It is maintenance. She did not elaborate. She did not dramatize. She stepped back and allowed the Oversight Committee to field questions. A healthcare policy analyst asked whether conditional funding would remain permanent policy. Harold responded without hesitation. Yes, he said. Standards are ongoing. The answer required no embellishment. Later that afternoon, Naomi visited the final clinic scheduled for modernization in rural Ohio. The building stood modestly against open farmland, far from city skylines and gala venues. Inside, updated diagnostic equipment replaced aging machines, and digital intake kiosks displayed the grievance portal clearly on the home screen. The clinic director walked beside her through narrow corridors. "Our staff morale has improved," he said. Patients noticed the difference. Naomi paused near a waiting area where a mother filled out forms on a tablet while her child colored quietly beside her. She observed without interrupting. Dignity, she understood, was visible in small details. Back at the Foundation headquarters, Daniel compiled a comprehensive 60-day report summarizing governance milestones and infrastructure progress. He sent copies to oversight members, board directors, and Nova Corps leadership. The document did not mention the night of the gala. It did not need to. Its pages carried the imprint of that moment without naming it. In her home office, Victoria reviewed the scholarship fund applications that had begun arriving. Essays described students from underserved communities seeking careers in healthcare administration. She read each carefully, noting not only academic achievement but resilience. Reform, she realized, was not limited to correcting institutions. It was about cultivating future leaders who would not repeat past mistakes. She sent Naomi a brief message. "Scholarship applications exceed expectations." Naomi responded simply, "Build capacity accordingly." As evenings settled, the Foundation building glowed softly against the skyline once more. Inside, the ballroom had been rearranged into smaller round tables where staff and community members continued informal discussions. There was no tension in their voices. There was intention. Oversight meetings were scheduled quarterly into the following year. Governance certification became a line item in annual performance reviews. Transparency dashboards updated automatically at midnight each day. Systems no longer waited for crisis. They anticipated accountability. Across town, Ethan reviewed final data before shutting down his computer for the night. 60-day metrics strong, he said during his last call with Naomi. Reform model gaining interest from other foundations. Naomi looked out at the river reflecting city lights. "Then share the framework," she replied. Not the story. The distinction mattered. The story had captured attention. The framework sustained change. In the rural clinic parking lot, the clinic director locked the doors and looked back at the building illuminated from within. He understood that the upgrades were not charity. They were partnership bound by standards. In Detroit, the physician reviewed updated patient wait time metrics and saw consistent improvement. She forwarded the report to the Oversight Committee with a note. Accountability improves care. Daniel, leaving the Foundation building late that night, paused beneath the chandeliers. They shimmered exactly as they had months before, but their meaning had evolved. They no longer symbolized exclusivity. They illuminated a room governed by policy. Upstairs, Harold filed the final documentation of the 60-day review into the permanent charter records. Oversight was no longer an amendment. It was identity. Victoria placed the scholarship fund confirmation letter in her desk drawer beside her grandfather's original mission statement. She did not frame it. She intended to revisit it often. In her office overlooking the skyline, Naomi closed her laptop and allowed herself a moment of stillness. 60 days earlier, ceremony had collided with consequence. Now, clinics operated with upgraded systems, staff moved with clearer expectations, and governance functioned without spectacle. Power had not retaliated. It had recalibrated. And in that recalibration, institutions learned that dignity is preserved not by applause or tradition, but by the quiet discipline of standards applied equally, documented carefully, and upheld without exception. The city outside continued its steady rhythm, unaware of the internal architecture that had shifted within one foundation's walls. But inside those walls, beneath crystal light and reinforced policy, accountability had taken root. And roots, once established, do not retreat when the spotlight fades. 90 days after the night that shifted everything, the Foundation Ballroom hosted its first annual Community Access Summit under the new charter, and this time the invitation list looked different. There were no velvet ropes separating donors from directors. Clinic nurses sat beside policy analysts. Community volunteers shared tables with board members. The chandeliers still cast warm light across polished marble, but the seating chart reflected reform rather than rank. On the LED wall, a single phrase appeared in steady white lettering. Accountability sustains impact. Naomi Whitaker arrived without announcement, taking a seat at a round table near the center rather than at the stage. She had declined the keynote invitation weeks earlier. Oversight was no longer a performance. It was routine. Harold Benton opened the summit with a concise update. 90-day infrastructure completion has reached 100% across 12 clinics, he said. The number did not ignite applause. It produced nods. Daniel Cruz followed with a dashboard projection showing grievance resolution rates holding steady at under 3 business days. The system had not regressed once headlines faded. That steadiness carried more weight than any standing ovation. A clinic administrator from Texas stepped forward and described the impact of upgraded diagnostic equipment reducing patient wait times by 20%. A nurse from Detroit spoke about the clarity of the new reporting portal and how junior staff members now felt empowered to raise concerns without fear. Victoria Langford sat among the attendees, not elevated but integrated. When the floor opened for leadership reflections, she stood without stepping toward a microphone. Tradition must evolve to remain honorable, she said. There was no tremor in her voice, only recognition. Naomi listened quietly, then rose when invited by Harold to share closing remarks. She did not move to the podium. She spoke from where she stood. Institutions do not fail because of one moment, she said. They fail when they refuse to examine the moment. Her words traveled through the room without force. We examined ours, and we codified what we learned. The LED wall shifted to display the charter amendment timeline, training completion records, and oversight committee attendance logs. Transparency had become visual language. After the formal session concluded, breakout discussions filled the ballroom. Daniel facilitated a roundtable on donor orientation standards, outlining how every future guest would complete a brief conduct acknowledgement before attending events. No one objected. It had become understood that access required alignment. Across town at NovaCore headquarters, Ethan reviewed quarterly impact analytics. Healthcare utilization rates improved in each funded clinic. Community satisfaction surveys reflected measurable trust growth. He forwarded the report to Naomi with a brief note. Impact trending upward. She read it during a pause between discussions and allowed herself a quiet breath. Reform had not slowed progress. It had accelerated it. In a smaller conference room off the main ballroom, the Oversight Committee convened for its scheduled quarterly review. Independent auditors presented findings showing 0 unresolved complaints and full compliance with governance certification requirements. Harold leaned back slightly, not in relaxation, but in acknowledgement of stability. We are no longer in correction mode, he said. We are in maintenance. Maintenance, Naomi knew, was where real leadership lived. Later that afternoon, Victoria approached Naomi near the entrance where volunteers were distributing informational brochures about the scholarship fund. The first cohort has been selected, she said. 12 students from 5 states. Naomi reviewed the list briefly. Healthcare administration majors. Community service records. Governance training enrollment confirmed. Invite them to observe the next oversight meeting, Naomi replied. Leadership should be visible to those who will inherit it. Victoria nodded. They will attend. Outside, the media presence was modest. The story had matured beyond spectacle. Analysts now cited the reform model in industry panels. Competing foundations quietly adopted similar conditional funding frameworks. The ripple effect moved through boardrooms far from the ballroom where it began. As evening settled, the summit concluded not with fireworks or celebratory music, but with the distribution of a public impact report detailing 90-day outcomes. Every page listed metrics, timelines, and corrective actions taken. There were no glossy photographs dominating the cover, just data. In the Detroit clinic, the physician reviewed the report on her tablet and forwarded it to her staff with a short message. This is what accountability looks like. In rural Ohio, the clinic director hung a printed copy of the impact summary in the staff break room. It was not decorative. It was instructional. Back at the foundation building, Daniel stood beneath the chandeliers once more as tables were cleared and chairs stacked. He remembered the earlier nights filled with assumption and applause. Now the same room held policy workshops and quarterly reviews. The transformation had not removed elegance. It had redirected it. Upstairs, Harold archived the 90-day report into permanent records, ensuring it would be referenced in future board orientations. Oversight was no longer a reaction to crisis. It was a prerequisite for continuity. Victoria returned home and placed the scholarship cohort list beside the framed charter amendment. Her reflection in the window looked different than it had months before. Less defensive, more deliberate. She understood that credibility rebuilt through action carries more weight than status inherited without scrutiny. Across the river, Naomi stood at her office window as twilight deepened into night. City lights flickered on in steady rhythm. 90 days earlier, a single moment had exposed a fracture. Today, clinics operated with upgraded systems, staff engaged through transparent reporting channels, and governance embedded itself into daily routine. She thought briefly of the young scholarship recipients who would sit in oversight meetings and witness policy in motion. Reform was not a chapter. It was curriculum. Ethan's final update for the day arrived with familiar steadiness. Quarterly metrics confirmed, he said. No deviations. Naomi closed her laptop and reached for her coat. Power had not retaliated. It had restructured. It had measured itself, corrected itself, and documented the correction. The chandeliers in the ballroom would glow again at future gatherings, casting light across faces that now understood access came with accountability. Institutions would continue evolving, as they must. But within this one, beneath polished marble and reinforced charter language, dignity had been written into policy and practiced without exception. And that practice, repeated day after day, would endure long after headlines faded and applause quieted. 6 months after the night that redirected the course of an institution, the foundation ballroom prepared for another major gathering. But this time the energy felt unmistakably different. There were no whispered hierarchies in the corners, no subtle glances measuring status, no unspoken lines dividing influence from access. The chandeliers still cast their familiar glow across marble floors, but beneath that light stood something sturdier than elegance. On the LED wall, a new title appeared in clean lettering: 6-month Impact and Forward Strategy. Naomi Whitaker entered without announcement, taking a seat among clinic directors and scholarship recipients rather than at the front. The room did not rise when she walked in. It did not need to. Respect no longer depended on spectacle. Harold Benton stepped forward to begin the session, his tone steady, his posture composed. 6 months ago, we implemented structural governance reform, he said. Today, we report sustained compliance, expanded access, and measurable community impact. The first slide displayed clinic modernization completion across all 12 initial sites, followed by expansion plans for 5 additional regions. Infrastructure metrics showed consistent performance improvements. Patient wait times reduced by an average of 18% across facilities. Grievance resolution rates holding under 3 business days. Training recertification scheduled annually with 100% participation. The numbers were not dramatic. They were disciplined. Daniel Cruz followed with a presentation outlining the scholarship cohort's integration into governance observation sessions. 12 students from underserved communities had completed foundational training modules and participated in 2 oversight meetings. Their reflections were displayed anonymously on the screen. Leadership is transparency in practice. Policy should protect those without power. Victoria Langford listened from the second row, her attention focused not on how she appeared, but on what had been built. When Harold invited her to share an update on the scholarship initiative, she rose calmly. We have secured funding for the next 3 years, she said, and each recipient will complete governance certification before graduation. Her voice carried clarity, not defensiveness. Naomi observed without interruption. Reform had matured beyond reaction into structure. After the formal presentation concluded, breakout sessions filled the ballroom once more. This time the discussions centered on expansion strategy rather than correction. Clinic directors shared insights about rural broadband access improvements funded through supplemental grants. Oversight members reviewed proposals for adapting the conditional funding framework to partner organizations in neighboring states. Ethan monitored the proceedings remotely from NovaCore headquarters, reviewing analytics that confirmed steady financial stability and positive long-term projections. He sent Naomi a brief update. Expansion viable within current capital structure. She glanced at the message, then returned her focus to the scholarship recipients gathered near the back of the room. One of the students, a young woman from Michigan pursuing healthcare administration, approached Naomi during a break. "I watched the first reform meeting online," she said quietly. "It changed how I think about leadership." Naomi met her eyes. "Leadership is not about occupying a room," she replied. "It is about shaping it." The student nodded, absorbing the simplicity of the statement. Across the ballroom, Daniel facilitated a strategic planning session focused on integrating governance checkpoints into every major foundation initiative moving forward. "No new program launches without oversight review," he explained. "Accountability precedes implementation." Staff members agreed without resistance. Oversight was no longer perceived as restriction. It was protection. In the executive suite upstairs, Harold convened a brief board meeting to ratify the forward strategy plan. The proposal included permanent conditional funding clauses, quarterly transparency dashboards, and annual external audits. The vote passed unanimously. The foundation charter, once amended in urgency, now evolved through consensus. Victoria signed the updated expansion resolution without hesitation. She understood that legacy was no longer measured by gala photographs, but by policy durability. Later that afternoon, Naomi visited one of the newly modernized clinics in Texas where expansion plans would soon begin. The facility hummed with efficient activity. Nurses navigated updated systems with ease. Patients moved through intake with minimal delay. A digital display in the waiting area outlined patient rights and grievance submission steps in clear language. Naomi stood quietly observing the flow of operations. No cameras followed her. No press statements accompanied the visit. The impact was visible without narration. Back at the foundation building, the ballroom emptied gradually as strategic discussions concluded. Staff members carried folders filled with action items rather than event programs. The LED wall shifted to display a timeline extending 18 months into the future, marking oversight reviews, infrastructure rollouts, and scholarship milestones. The future had structure. As evening approached, Victoria walked through the now quiet ballroom alone. She paused beneath the chandeliers, remembering how the same light had once framed a moment of misjudgment. Now it illuminated a room governed by clarity. She did not linger in regret. She acknowledged growth. Across the river, Ethan finalized a comprehensive 6-month impact report summarizing infrastructure progress, governance compliance, financial stability, and community trust indicators. He forwarded it to Naomi with a single sentence. "Sustainable trajectory confirmed." Naomi read the report in her office, overlooking the skyline as the sun dipped below the horizon. 6 months earlier, assumption had met consequence. Today, policy met progress. She thought briefly of the first night, the flicker of the LED wall, the shift in the room's temperature. That moment had not been the climax. It had been the catalyst. Reform had not been loud. It had been methodical. She closed the report and stood by the window watching city lights reflect across the river. Institutions would continue to gather beneath chandeliers. Awards would still be presented. Speeches would still be delivered. But beneath ceremony now lived documented standards, embedded oversight, and a generation of emerging leaders trained to value alignment over appearance. The foundation building across the water glowed steadily in the evening dark. Inside its walls, governance operated as routine rather than reaction. Clinics across multiple states functioned with upgraded systems and measurable improvements. Scholarship recipients prepared for careers shaped by lessons written into charter amendments rather than whispered as cautionary tales. Power had not sought revenge. It had sought reform. And in seeking reform, it had rewritten an institution's identity not through spectacle, but through sustained discipline. The city outside continued its quiet rhythm, unaware that within those marble walls a permanent recalibration had taken place. Yet those who had witnessed the transformation understood that dignity, once codified, does not fade with time. It endures in policy, in practice, and in the quiet confidence of rooms where access is defined not by assumption, but by accountability applied without exception. 1 year after the night that quietly redefined everything, the Foundation Ballroom prepared for its annual summit under a banner that read simply, 1 year of measured change. The chandeliers shimmered with the same steady glow they had carried for decades, but the meaning of the room had evolved beyond decoration. The marble floors reflected not hierarchy, but alignment. Naomi Whitaker entered without announcement, dressed as she always was in deliberate simplicity, taking a seat at a round table beside clinic directors, scholarship recipients, and oversight members. No spotlight followed her. No introduction preceded her. The room no longer required it. Harold Benton stepped to the front and began the review with measured calm. 12 months ago, governance reform was implemented, he said. Today, we report sustained compliance, expanded infrastructure, and cultural stability. The LED wall displayed metrics rather than photographs. Infrastructure completion now extended to 17 clinics across 5 states. Average patient wait time reduction stood at 19%. Grievance response rates held under 3 business days for 3 consecutive quarters. Oversight certification compliance remained at 100% across board and executive leadership. The data did not ask for applause. It stood as proof. Daniel Cruz followed with a summary of internal culture indicators. Employee confidence scores had increased by 40% since the initial reform. Anonymous submissions decreased in urgency while increasing in constructive feedback. Transparency dashboards updated automatically at midnight each day without deviation. Reform had transitioned from reaction to rhythm. Victoria Langford sat among the attendees, no longer defined by a single moment, but by sustained participation. When she was invited to address the room regarding the scholarship initiative, she rose calmly. The first cohort has completed its governance practicum, she said. All 12 students will graduate with certification and mentorship placements within healthcare institutions. Her words were steady, free of performance. Naomi listened quietly. Change, she knew, was proven through repetition. During a breakout session, one of the scholarship recipients approached Naomi with a question about conditional funding frameworks. Will this model expand beyond healthcare? The student asked. Naomi considered her response carefully. It already has, she said. Standards travel wherever integrity is valued. The student nodded, absorbing the simplicity of that truth. Across town at NovaCore headquarters, Ethan monitored the summit feed while reviewing annual financial projections. Investor confidence remained strong. Several foundations had adopted similar oversight clauses. Analysts referenced the model not as controversy, but as benchmark. Ethan sent Naomi a brief message. Annual review stable. Expansion feasible. She glanced at it and returned her attention to the room where the foundation's evolution unfolded without drama. In the afternoon session, Harold announced the formal integration of oversight checkpoints into every strategic initiative for the next fiscal year. Accountability precedes expansion, he said. The phrase settled naturally into conversation. It no longer sounded corrective. It sounded foundational. Victoria later met Naomi near the balcony overlooking the ballroom floor. The chandeliers cast familiar reflections across marble, but neither woman lingered in nostalgia. A year ago, I believed ceremony defined leadership, Victoria said quietly. Naomi regarded her evenly. Leadership defines ceremony, she replied. There was no tension in the exchange, only clarity. As evening approached, the final presentation displayed a timeline tracing the past 12 months. From immediate governance reform to sustained compliance, from infrastructure rollout to scholarship integration, from oversight committee formation to permanent charter amendments. The screen did not display the moment that began it all. It displayed what followed. When Harold invited Naomi to offer closing remarks, she stood where she was rather than stepping to the podium. Power does not need to announce itself, she said. It needs to align itself. Her voice remained steady, unforced. 1 year ago, we examined our standards. Today, we practice them. She did not expand further. The simplicity carried weight. After the summit concluded, staff and community members remained in conversation around round tables. There were no raised glasses, no staged photographs. Just dialogue about next year's expansion and upcoming oversight reviews. Daniel walked through the ballroom once more, remembering how differently the same room had once felt. The chandeliers had not changed. The structure had. Upstairs, Harold filed the annual report into permanent records, ensuring the charter would carry this chapter forward as precedent rather than exception. Victoria returned home that evening and placed the annual impact report beside the framed scholarship certificate from the first graduating student. She no longer measured legacy by events attended or applause received. She measured it by policies upheld. Across the river, Naomi stood in her office overlooking the skyline as city lights flickered on one by one. She thought briefly of the night that had forced a choice between silence and structure. She had chosen structure, not for spectacle, for sustainability. Ethan entered with the final summary of the day. All metrics confirmed, he said. Annual audit complete. Naomi nodded. Then we continue, she replied. Reform, she understood, was not a destination. It was discipline. In clinics across multiple states, patients moved through upgraded systems without awareness of the institutional recalibration that had secured those improvements. Nurses documented cases with confidence in the reporting portal. Scholarship recipients prepared for careers shaped by governance training rather than assumption. The foundation building across the water glowed steadily against the night sky, its marble halls carrying a different kind of legacy now. Not one of unchecked ceremony, but of documented accountability. The chandeliers would shine again next year, illuminating faces that understood access required alignment. And as the city settled into its quiet rhythm, Naomi turned from the window and gathered her coat. She did not need a camera to validate what had been built. She had not needed applause to sustain it. The proof stood in policy, in practice, in measured outcomes recorded day after day without deviation. 1 year later, the lesson remained simple and unshaken. Dignity does not beg for recognition. It establishes standards and becomes the proof.